Cleveland, Ohio, November 22nd, 2014. Snowflakes drifted lazily down over Cudell Recreation Center, softening the edges of the world. Muting sound as if the city were holding its breath. In the middle of the park, 12-year-old Tamir Rice played with a toy pellet gun. He pointed it, laughed, and mimicked the movies he'd seen. Innocent imagination against a gray winter afternoon. Within minutes, a police cruiser skidded across the grass. Seconds later, 2 shots rang out. Tamir Rice collapsed. The boy's sister, 14-year-old Tajai Rice, sprinted across the snow toward her brother's motionless body. But instead of being comforted, instead of being allowed to hold his hand in his final moments, she was tackled to the ground, handcuffed, and thrown into the back of a patrol car. Tamir lay dying just feet away. This is the part of the story most people know. The part that made headlines, sparked protests, and reignited a national conversation on policing and racial bias in America. But what happened after? What did it mean for a teenage girl, forced to watch her brother die, to also be treated as a criminal in his final moments? And why? In the years that followed, did whispers begin to circulate that her own story held layers of mystery? Tonight, on Case Wave, we peel back the snow and the silence, tracing the haunting case of Tamir Rice's sister. Because sometimes the truth we think we know is only the beginning. In the aftermath of Tamir's death, the Rice family became a national symbol. Their tragedy was replayed in headlines, on TV screens, and across social media timelines. The focus was Tamir, and rightfully so, a child gunned down in seconds. His life ended before it had the chance to begin. But for Tajai, her own trauma was both public and invisible. She was the girl who was handcuffed, the girl screaming in the back of a patrol car while her brother's body bled out on the snow. The girl who became a witness, not just to a killing, but to her own erasure. The official explanation? Officers claimed they restrained her for safety, for protocol. But anyone watching the footage could see, it wasn't safety, it was control. What does it say about America, about policing, that a teenage black girl was seen not as a victim, not as a sister, but as a threat? At first, investigators treated the case as a straightforward tragedy. A child shot, a sister restrained. The officers' split-second decision. They called it a random act of violence. But as the months stretched into years, activists pressed harder. Attorneys began digging. Independent journalists started asking, why was Tajai treated this way? The deeper they dug, the stranger the story became. Because buried beneath the headlines and the lawsuits was a quieter narrative. A narrative of a young woman growing up in the shadow of her brother's death. And the choices she made afterward. By 2015, whispers started to emerge. Was Tajai just another forgotten victim? Or was her life beginning to spiral in ways that no one wanted to talk about? Investigators quietly noted patterns. Tajai had become withdrawn after Tamir's death. Understandable. But then came erratic behavior. Missed school, late-night disappearances, friend groups that worried her mother. In Cleveland's neighborhoods, trauma doesn't fade, it hardens. Witnesses described Tajai as angry, reckless, always looking over her shoulder. Then came the first police report. Barely a year after Tamir's death, Tajai was brought in for questioning, not as a victim this time, but as a potential witness in a violent altercation outside a convenience store. Was it coincidence? Bad luck? Or the ripple effects of being handcuffed on the worst day of her life? By 2016, investigators were chasing new leads. The original story of a boy killed, a sister handcuffed, had calcified in the public's mind. But behind closed doors, whispers grew louder. Because when another young black man was shot just blocks from where Tamir died, evidence pointed in a direction no one expected. Toward someone close to the Rice family. A name surfaced, a connection, and investigators were forced to ask, could trauma twist into something darker? The suspect was an outsider, not a random stranger. It was someone woven into the Rice family's grief. And that's when the case shifted from tragedy to something far more complicated. Grief does strange things to people. Some collapse inward. Some channel pain into activism, into fighting for change. But for Tajai Rice, the grief was tangled, raw, unresolved, and stained by the memory of being treated as a criminal while her brother lay dying. For weeks after Tamir's funeral, she couldn't sleep. She told friends she still heard the sound of gunshots in her dreams. She said she could still feel the officer's weight pinning her down, the sting of handcuffs against her wrists. Her mother, Tamir Rice, tried to hold the family together. But as the national spotlight shone bright on Tamir's death, Tajai felt invisible, a secondary character in her own tragedy. And invisibility can be dangerous. By early 2015, reports of her skipping classes multiplied. Teachers said she was there but not there. Friends described her as restless, edgy. Neighbors whispered that she had started hanging out with older men, people with questionable ties. Cleveland police, the same department that killed her brother, began keeping quiet tabs on her. Irony twisted into cruelty. The system that traumatized her now documented her every move. March 2015. Gunfire erupted late one evening near the same recreation center where Tamir had been shot just months earlier. This time, the victim was a 22-year-old black man named Marcus Hall. Witnesses said they saw a group arguing near the playground. Then, a figure stepped forward, shots rang out, and the crowd scattered. When detectives pieced together accounts, one name surfaced again and again: Tajai Rice. At first, investigators dismissed it. It couldn't be. She was a grieving sister, not a suspect. But then came another detail. Tajai had been seen with Marcus days earlier. They'd been close. Maybe too close. The narrative shifted. Tajai wasn't just a passive victim anymore. She was at the center of something bigger. Detectives discovered Marcus Hall had a record, low-level drug charges, some gang affiliations. And Tajai? She'd been spotted with him at parties. Even posted cryptic social media messages that seemed to reference violence, loyalty, betrayal. What started as a random park shooting now looked like it might be tangled in loyalty, grief, and maybe revenge. For the first time, detectives began to ask a dangerous question. Had Tamir's sister inherited not just his trauma, but his fate? By summer of 2015, rumors spread fast. Some said Tajai pulled the trigger. Others said she was just there, a bystander dragged into a cycle of violence. A few whispered darker theories, that the police were trying to smear her, to silence a family that had sued the city. But then came evidence investigators couldn't ignore. A witness claimed Tajai confronted Marcus over a debt. Another swore they heard her scream, "You'll pay for what you did to me." What had Marcus done? And why did Tajai believe he was connected to her pain? When police traced a weapon linked to the shooting, their suspicions deepened. The fingerprints weren't clear, partial, smudged. But one print stood out. It matched someone close to Tajai. Not her, but someone she trusted. The deeper they looked, the less sense it made. Why was an 18-year-old girl, still grieving her brother, tangled in a street crime investigation? Why were police so quick to float her name, yet so hesitant to follow other leads? Journalists started asking, was this investigation about finding justice or discrediting the Rice family? And then came the biggest twist of all. When forensic reports finally came back, they revealed the weapon had been wiped deliberately. The partial print didn't match Tajai. It matched one of the very officers who had responded the night Tamir was killed. Suddenly, the narrative collapsed. How could the same department that killed a 12-year-old now be tied, however faintly, to the murder of a young black man just blocks away? Was it coincidence? Contamination? Or something more sinister? The Rice family, already living in the eye of a storm, now faced whispers that their daughter wasn't just a grieving teen, but a pawn in a game far larger than her. A cover-up? A warning? Retaliation? No one could say for certain. But what was clear was this. Tamir Rice's sister had become a symbol not just of racial bias in a single moment, being handcuffed instead of helped, but how trauma, policing, and secrecy can spiral into stories more twisted than anyone imagines. For most people, trauma fades with time. For Tajai, it grew heavier. By the fall of 2015, her days blurred into restless nights. Friends noticed the way she stared off, silent, when sirens passed by. Teachers reported she seemed angry at everything. Even small interactions could trigger explosive reactions. Some called it acting out. Others recognized it for what it was: post-traumatic stress. Yet Cleveland didn't offer Tajai counseling. There was no state program for the sister of. Instead, she was left alone to navigate grief that mutated into rage. She began drifting into circles where rage was currency. In neighborhoods where everyone has a scar, pain doesn't isolate you, it binds you. And the streets remembered her name. Tamir's sister, they called her. Sometimes with pity, sometimes with respect, sometimes with suspicion. The community around Cudell Recreation Center never forgot what happened to Tamir. Candlelight vigils were held. Protest signs faded in the rain, but were replaced with new ones. But Tajai, she was harder to read. Some neighbors swore she was sliding down a dangerous path. They saw her with men twice her age, involved in things too heavy for someone barely 18. Others said she was misunderstood, trapped in the role of the angry black girl. Her every move scrutinized more harshly than her white peers. One neighbor described it bluntly. Everybody wanted her to be the poster child for grief, but she was just a kid, and a kid who'd been handcuffed like a criminal. It was this perception that made what came next even more complicated. By late 2015, the mainstream media had shifted its attention. Protests flared elsewhere. Other cases claimed headlines. But a handful of independent journalists stayed in Cleveland, still haunted by the unanswered questions. Why was Tajai restrained that night? Why were response times so slow after Tamir was shot? And why was her name surfacing in connection with Marcus Hall's murder? Journalist Sarah Whitman filed open records requests. What she received chilled her. Police reports on the Marcus Hall case had been altered. Dates crossed out, timelines shifted. Witness statements were lost. And Tajai's name appeared in reports where, by all accounts, she hadn't even been present. Was this incompetence or orchestration? The most shocking discovery came from surveillance. The recreation center had cameras, the same type that captured Tamir's last moments. But when journalists requested footage from the night Marcus Hall was killed, the tapes were missing, not corrupted, not destroyed in a fire, just not available. The official explanation? A technical failure. But Whitman dug deeper, speaking to an employee off record. That employee claimed the tapes had been confiscated, not by detectives, but by higher-ups. And the date of confiscation? The same week protests reignited outside Cleveland Police Headquarters. Coincidence? Or cover-up? For Tajai, none of this was abstract. She lived it. Her name floated in police files, whispered in streets, debated in courtrooms. But inside, she was unraveling. She journaled obsessively, pages of anger, guilt, confusion. Friends later said she would scribble one line again and again. They took him from me, then they took me too. Her mother begged for therapy options, but the system offered none. Instead, Tajai became another young black woman, shouldering grief too large for her age. Watched but never helped. When one journalist finally interviewed her, she asked Tajai, "What do you want people to know?" Tajai's answer was haunting. That I wasn't a threat. I was the sister. In early 2016, another twist deepened the mystery. A second weapon surfaced during an unrelated raid. Ballistics linked it to Marcus Hall's shooting. The problem? It wasn't the same weapon originally entered into evidence. 2 guns, 2 stories, 1 case. And in the margins of a property report, scribbled in handwriting investigators never identified, were the words, "Keep this quiet." Was Tajai being framed? Or was she tangled in something even bigger? A feud, a debt, or a conspiracy meant to bury the truth about Tamir's death? By now, the case was less about Tajai herself and more about what she represented. To activists, she was proof of systemic bias. The black girl handcuffed instead of helped. To police, she was a liability, someone whose trauma might one day explode in public. To journalists, she was a key to a larger puzzle. Maybe even a missing link between Tamir's death and the corruption within the department. The most disturbing theory whispered among journalists was this: Marcus Hall's death wasn't random. It wasn't street violence. It was a message, a warning to anyone who tried to keep Tamir's story alive.